Top 5 ACC realignment thoughts. Now, this a little bit undercut by the recent news that the league appears to be moving towards a revenue distribution model that is merit-based on postseason. But, I guess if you wanted to apply this to anything afterwards, it probably still applies. So, number 5. Duke, Wake, Georgia Tech, Syracuse, and I'll throw Boston College in here, have far less options if this thing were to break up. So they're kind of in a position where they have to listen. Now, you heard Brandon Marcello a second ago, if you were listening, say that Wake Forest is in favor of the merit-based distribution because they're good in football right now. They're in the postseason. So Duke, I guess, would be in favor of it as it goes to basketball and so on and so forth. But as far as football goes, where most of that money is going to come in from the college football playoff, then Wake Forest, is for this. But that being said, that unless something really changes with these schools, and I should have put Boston College in here as well, they kind of are at the mercy of what the big schools, the big TV dollar revenue, most of the time conference champion schools want at the end of it. They just kind of have to sit there and take it.
I don't know if they have to sit there and take it.
I mean, I don't know what other option they have. I mean, of course.
Well, the other option they have is to rely on the granted rights. Go ahead, try to leave. I mean, they got to get something out of this. I do understand that they also understand it's smart to try to figure out a way to make some people happy.
Yeah, so I guess they're like every other conference's members who are not all blue bloods. I mean, look at the Pac-12. If you look at just the LA part of it, but then who do we constantly talk about if there ever were to be more realignment? It's Oregon and Washington. We're not talking about Oregon State or Wazoo. They know that they would be in trouble. Look at the Big 12, Baylor, Kansas State. I know KU with basketball that they would probably be okay, but Iowa State. I mean, what are they looking at realistically outside of the Big 12? Not a lot. I mean, so. ACC, I mean, here you have these schools that you listed that aren't a part of the not-so-magnificent 7. Same, the SEC, you can even go like, okay, well, what about Van? They don't have quite as many, but, that's basically the case for everybody. I think, though, too, I saw like I don't even want to say. I saw somebody who's in media basically celebrating the fact that, if there were to be like more of this – ACC splintering and they go join the SEC, it'd be more of a fracturing and then, at all the other lower level schools. Like, what exactly do you think is going to happen to college football if it's just 32 teams all the time? Do you think everybody who's watching is just going to continue watching? Nope. All of these fan bases around the country are just going to be like, all right, my team doesn't exist anymore, but I'm still a college football fan.
And it's been regional sport for so long.
And we've been told time and time again that even if there is a splintering or fraction, it doesn't mean teams are just going to start disappearing left and right. Now, there might be some programs on the lower levels that, have to cut football. But are any of those Big 12 or Pac-12 or ACC schools? Probably not. So, there's a widening gap. I think that, that's obvious. But, there's less options for the schools who aren't, full of pedigree and history and big money across the board or big-time history, and that's the reality for every single conference out there. There's haves and there's have-nots.
What's going to be interesting is if they do eventually just trim it down to a handful of schools, eventually those who make the first cut, some of those who are like, we're pretty good, they may not make the next cut, and then the next cut, and then the next cut.
Well, what's so funny about this guy is the fact that from the position he's in right now, it's fun to point and laugh. But that particular team, would probably be the laughingstock of the 32-team league, and probably having spent the most money. That's the thing about it. So, that's one way to look at the future and try and predict it. But remind yourself of who you are too. Sometimes, just because you're part of the club doesn't mean you're the cool member of the club. It just means you got really freaking lucky for one reason or another.
Yeah, everybody's got a Grover Dill.
Exactly,
they've got the, all right, go punch him. I'm going to wait here. So
Archie had Jughead.
Yeah, exactly. Number 4. So you break up the league. What then? Now, Florida State, Clemson, UNC, and Virginia all would probably have landing spots and multiple options. And before anybody scoffs at this team's not AAU or this and that, look, they would have options. But, it would wane as you got down to, say, NC State, Virginia Tech, the And look, the only two schools in the ACC that repeatedly get over 3 million viewers on television, and television is what is driving all this, are Florida State and Clemson. There was only one game in the ACC last year that averaged over 3 million viewers that didn't have either of those two teams in it. It was North Carolina and North Carolina State, because that's a big in-state rivalry, and most of the state of North Carolina was watching it. So you have an issue here if you're those other teams, and your juice wanes as you move on down the ladder. They have options on down the line, but even the ones in the Magnificent Seven, and we can kind of combine number 3 with this here, the options are limited past the top 2 or 3, really, and honestly, about who would be where and what and who would be interested in them.
Yeah, I don't know who to believe on whether they're whatever magnificent I can't say 7, 6, 5, 8 whatever they were, they all were sweet and happy today.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. And number 3 was kind of along these same lines in that. Does the entire Magnificent Seven have landing spots? I mean, NC State and Virginia Tech are going to land somewhere, but do they have options that are acceptable to them, or does it start to get really weird, as where we keep breaking up leagues?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't happening, but, very well down the line, maybe this rears its head again, particularly with Clemson and FSU. But that was what I was questioning this entire time was, are they all insured that they have a spot? Like 7 schools at once, and okay, the top 2 or 3 or 4, sure, but NC State's barking. I just that seemed like a lot of schools, and I said the comment at the very beginning, that tells me if that's in fact the case that they've already talked and had to have talked with other leagues to feel that confident, or it was a huge bluff on the part of half of those schools maybe, and I guess it worked out well no matter what in the end. But yeah, I mean those that barked, and in the end, I guess, are going to get what they want. But yeah, I would be curious to know if you could really take the NC State AD or the Vatech AD, behind closed doors and have a genuine conversation of if this really fell apart, are you getting an SEC invite? Are you getting a Big Ten invite? Because I'm not so sure about that. And if not, I mean, Big 12, is that where you're headed? I don't know. An alliance with the pack again? I mean, what are we doing here? But yeah, I don't know.
The problem is so, say you start splintering off, and FSU and Clemson went to the SEC, and maybe Miami or somebody else. You've got 4 schools here, and you have 4 schools to go somewhere else, and then some of the schools come to the Big 12, and then you have this kind of remnant of the East Coast and West Coast. Well, that is completely untenable for playing games in any regard, because there's such a gap in the time zone. This isn't the Big 12 absorbing some teams in the Mountain and the Pacific where you're talking about an hour or 2. You're talking about 3 hours of difference. So that means, if NC State and Oregon State were in the same conference, you can't kick off a game at noon, and you can't kick off a game at 9 o'clock.
No, you can't.
So you can't do it. Number 2, what does your only TV partner think? Because ESPN's the only one the ACC has, so they can be doing all this, but ESPN is the one they have to negotiate with, and they have no motivation to do it. They're reworking their seemingly entire business model right now. So this would seem to be a non-starter when it comes to...
Yeah, ESPN's not going to help somebody to hurt them.
This was the part that when I saw this yesterday, I was like, this part doesn't make any sense, though. They'd have to pay more money to break their own contract that they already have a really sweet deal on for the next several... that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
To do what? To spend a bunch of money to get a couple of those schools into the league they already have to, I don't know. That part of it just was really weird to me.
And their investment in the ACC dissolves, right? They're not going to do that.
You already have you have a sweetheart deal that goes for another, guys, it's 13 years. They have the ACC for 13 more years. So why would they break a sweetheart deal with more than a decade on it just to get a couple of them into the other league that they already have? Yeah, that part, that never really made any sense, but I just assumed that there was some other aspect to it. But yeah, guess we won't know right now on this question.
No, absolutely not. And number 1, how valuable are you really? And the 2 schools here, they do have proven television value, because through thick and thin, their people are watching. People watch to see FSU lose. Their numbers have been good even until the between 2017 and 2021 where things were bad. But when they're good, they're really good, and they drive the money. But how valuable are you really in comparison to where you're going? Yes, if you're FSU and Clemson and you go into the SEC, you add a lot more value television-wise, because that means that there's going to be games and conference games like FSU and Florida is now a conference game, and it's weighted that much more. Clemson and Oklahoma playing is going to be huge. But, how valuable are you really, and can you keep lose some of that value when you make the decision that Oklahoma's made, Craig, to go in and not be number one for the conference title every year anymore?
Yeah, I mean, possibly not. Most likely not. We'll see on that. Oklahoma's a top 5 to 10 brand, so I mean, they're going to add value wherever they go. Same thing with Texas, and if Florida State's in the vicinity or slightly out of that, I don't know if you'd say I guess top 15ish, probably better for them. But I mean, do you add value to either the Big Ten or the SEC right now? I don't know. I'm not these TV executives and those folks, but there's only so few of those remaining, and they're one of them, or two of them, I guess, they're on the screen. So that's where a lot of the chatter comes from, is they're not like people who are like them, like in terms of the value and the luster and the spotlight and all of that. They are more like, I guess, most of the schools in the SEC or a lot of the schools in the Big Ten. And I don't know, I'm very you sound like you want this. Why do you want this?
I don't necessarily want it. Okay. I mean, I would like I don't necessarily want it or don't want it. I want Florida State to have as much money as they can possibly get so they can remain competitive and compete for national titles. But I don't know if they won't be able to do that in the 12-team playoff anyway, being in the ACC.
Right.
I feel a little bit nervous, like you do as an Oklahoma fan, of, well, what's this going to be like year in, year out? Year over year, are you going to be constantly in it, or is it just going to be like, all right, well, this is our turn every 4 years? And look, I'll take LSU's lot where, they'll have some
big boys.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take LSU's lot if they can be LSU, not necessarily what Alabama and Georgia are doing, but if they can be LSU where, you have your peaks and then you kind of, go through it for a second and you have peaks again, I'll deal with that. But
is that the same person who's saying that, who says you expect and only want championships?
Well, I mean, no. That's all I remember and care about and will give merit to are the seasons you won championships. I will enjoy individual games and moments, but I'm not going to look back and go, oh, remember that year they lost 3 games? That was a fun one. No.
Well, here's the thing, and I didn't have time to clarify earlier on Oklahoma. I don't mind if they don't go 11-1, 10-2 every year, but they can still make the playoff going 8-4 based on the way the new playoff's going to work out. Everybody's going to have to adjust their expectations, and losing 3 or 4 games might not actually be the death knell that it was when it put you in the Meineke Car Care Bowl or whatever, as opposed to now you're the 12th seed in the playoff.
Right, because
that makes a huge difference, and you're playing in the SEC, so you're going to take a couple more losses on average, or another loss on average than you're accustomed to. But I do worry of if 11-2 or 11-1, 12-2, or 11-3, whatever, turns into 6-6, and then you're not even making the playoff. And that's what I worry about. I can deal with a couple more losses, and I was talking about that earlier. But if those losses are suddenly moving more towards 500, and 500 doesn't get you even into the playoff when it's expanded, and now you're just playing an outside bowl, and there's 6 teams in your conference that are ahead of you on any, that's going to be a fall from grace. I don't care how much money you're making. That is a fall from grace, because right now, damn it, you are above basically pedigree and history-wise every single school that you're walking into that conference with, save for Alabama. You're on par or as decorated as any of those others, minus Alabama. So is that going to still be the case 10, 15, 20 years from now? Are you going to still be looked at the same way? Probably, because I don't think...
Or are you going to be Nebraska?
Are you going to be Nebraska, where, you may be getting the playoff every once in a while, but you typically are losing 4 or 5 games every year. That's just the part that I'm a little bit nervous about. By the way, though, got some Cincinnati news to bust out the show today.
Are you done?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Paul. Thanks to Texas Beef House for the top 5 sponsorship.
Cincinnati